yes, if you can convince the mortgage company, the bank, whatever the lender is who's contemplating doing a foreclosure sale, to accept what you're proposing, then the creditor will, as part of the settlement agreement, stop the foreclosure process. The problem these days with that sort of negotiation stance is real estate prices have been going up like a rocket. So let me contrast what was happening some years ago with what's happening today. And I'm going to focus primarily on, say, a second mortgage because, well, second mortgages get whatever's left over after the first mortgage holder has conducted the foreclosure sale. So a few years ago, when real estate prices were depressed as a result of what is now being termed the Great Recession, which does seem to be looming on the horizon now, yet another chapter in that, seconds usually did not even initiate a foreclosure sale because if they were to do so, since the first gets paid first, that's why we call it a first, the second might get chump change or nothing at all. As real estate prices have gone up and there's considerable equity in properties, well, a second that hasn't been paid is now in a position to go ahead and do the foreclosure because it's going to get paid in full as part of the process. Yes, the first will get paid. They don't really care one way or the other. They're just interested in getting paid themselves. So are you going to be able to convince that second to accept your negotiation stance? Some years ago, yeah, you probably could have. Today, not so likely. Now, because interest rates have been going up somewhat rapidly right now, that may slow the housing market down because the cost of borrowing money has gone up. And if that happens, well, when people aren't buying a house or whatever the commodity or product is, the law of supply and demand says if you want to sell, you're going to have to lower the price. And if prices come down sufficiently, well, then you might be in a position of being able to negotiate with that second mortgage or a second mortgage holder, because the second mortgage holder is probably not going to try to foreclose if you've got a situation where that second mortgage holder is undersecured. That is, the value of the house is such that the entire second mortgage is not fully secured, maybe just a portion of it is. So it does, once again, depend on context. My feeling is, I keep coming back to this, bankruptcy is a much more effective tool in stopping a foreclosure. Because if there's a foreclosure sale looming on the horizon, chances are you've already got a pretty big deficiency there. You are in default. California, if the creditor has already filed the notice of default, within 3 months, it can file a notice of trustee sale, and 3 weeks later, that house is gone. So if you've gotten to that point, it's going to be hard for you to come up with a deal that sweetens things enough to get the creditor to say, okay, I'll stop the foreclosure sale. I mean, let's just choose some numbers, not necessarily specific to anybody who's listening to this. Let's say you've got a mortgage and you're $70,000 behind on the mortgage payments. And the creditor has tried to work something out, you just haven't come through, so that creditor has set a foreclosure sale date. So you call up the creditor and say, hey, how about if we work something out? What are you going to offer to that creditor? You're going to offer, I'll start making payments again? You've already got a $70,000 arrearage plus whatever the principal is. And if that creditor sells the house in foreclosure in, let's say, a couple of weeks, it gets paid in full, including that $70,000 arrearage, the principal. It's got that money in its pocket right now. How are you going to come up with something that's going to be sweeter than that? Chances are you're not going to be able to. And so that's when we talk about filing, say, for example, a Chapter 13 bankruptcy case and use the Chapter 13 plan as a way to catch up on that arrearage over a 5-year period. That raises a problem that, well, leads me to the question I typically ask someone who calls up saying, I'm behind on my mortgage, I'd like to file for bankruptcy. this person tells me, yes, I want to catch up through a Chapter 13 plan. My immediate question is, what's changed? What do you mean? I'm asked. Well, you haven't been able to make the mortgage payments thus far, and now there's this huge arrearage. We'll stick with our $70,000. You've got a $70,000 arrearage. You're going to have to pay that in full over the 5 years of the plan, plus make every mortgage payment that comes due on time after the day we file that bankruptcy petition. So if you haven't been able to make the mortgage payments thus far, what's changed to give you that additional income so that you can make those payments in future? And that's usually where the rubber meets the road. And the person might say, you know, I had lost my job, but now I got a new one. I've got great income. I can't cure the arrearage in one lump sum, but because I've got this additional income, I can do it over a 5-year period. That's the kind of person, yep, we're going to pop you into a Chapter 13, take care of the problem. But then there's the person who has an unrealistic view of what bankruptcy can do. I've had people suggest, well, I thought you could just erase debts. Yeah, but if you have a secured debt, that is a debt that's secured by a tangible asset that can be repossessed or foreclosed upon in the event of a default, that kind of debt, you don't just poof, make it go away. You're not going to get a free house. I mean, if you could, then everybody would buy a house today and immediately file for bankruptcy tomorrow. And we'd have a whole raft of folks with free houses, and nobody would be lending money to buy houses anymore. Nobody would be building houses. It would be quite a change in the way things are. So again, another somewhat long-winded answer to a simple question, but for the most part, debt settlement is not going to stop a foreclosure sale.